Be no issues recording. Yesterday there were some issues. Rec Recording has started. Fantastic. Um, Welcome. So, like I said, my name is Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Impact. And in our presentation today, you should be comfortable being on camera or off camera, whichever is most comfortable for you. But we are going to be presenting some slides. So there's lots to look at, and there'll be some things to engage with. Um, as I said, today we're going to be talking about agency indicators, data collection, and data storytelling. We have a couple of goals for our workshop today. This is the sixth or seventh workshop that we've run so far as part of our data capacity building work. We started with some workshops back in February around building a data culture and strengthening data literacy. And last month we worked around documentation and data collection. Our workshops in February were more robustly attended than our workshops in March. And so we're trying a different tactic this month, running kind of one omnibus workshop after quarterly reporting is ostensibly done, but before other things kind of take precedence for the rest of the month. And we'll say multiple times that we are a small but mighty team who are here to support your work, both for the American Rescue Plan and for regular state business. So we remain your thought partners, regardless of whether you have American Rescue Plan funding. A lot of what we talk about today will have an American Rescue Plan Act orientation because we have our eyes on the annual report that's coming up, and we've had lots of questions about choosing indicators, thinking about data collection, and getting ourselves ready to tell a data story. So here are some of our goals for today. We'll be providing some initial guidance for choosing what we will talk about, our agency selected indicators. We're going to identify some ways to collect data for new and for existing projects. And we're going to talk about this from a very 10,000 foot view, but as I already said, and I'll continue to say, we're here if you want to customize a conversation or have a different conversation that's more personal to your agency's work. You can see in our chat that we've got folks from all across state government focus on lots of different state business. So your data might be people, your data might be sales, your data might be roads. So we've got lots of folks who are trying to track lots of things. And then we're going to lay the groundwork for thinking about how to use data to tell a story. We're actually working on some content for a full day training, hopefully later this year after summer. And I think it's going to be a really useful exercise for folks to learn how to actually take on their data and craft a really important story and use technology tools that we have available at the state to do that. Lots of things about what I just presented as goals don't feel super concrete. This is initial guidance or new strategies, laying groundwork, but we recognize that this is all really a work in progress. Many of you have coming to this work brand new. You might not have a background in research or data. You also might be lacking the capacity within your agency, but be tasked with collecting information on a brand new project. So we know that everyone's coming to this from a different place. The goal of convening is both to share information, learn together, and also share strategies and expertise from across state government. And there's a couple of caveats that we just need to present before we get into the content. We use a lot of terms. I used to say interchangeably. These aren't interchangeable terms necessarily, but if there's anything about data, analytics, evidence, research that we say in a context that doesn't quite make sense, please stop us, ask us questions. I'm pretty adept flipping back and forth between my presentation and the chat window. So, raise your hand, put something in the chat. We'll check on it. We'll answer your question. And even if we have to have an offline conversation, we're totally open to that. Becoming a data-informed organization isn't going to happen today by attending this one workshop, but our hope is that it sparks for you some curiosity, hopefully builds some confidence, and connects you to others in state government who are doing this work. And this work can't be done alone. So the Data and Policy Analytics Unit is your partner. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do before we jump and why we're here based on sort of expectations around the American Rescue Plan. And then we jump into the content. So a lot of words before we jump into the nitty gritty. Any questions so far about the goals for the day? Some of the language that we use. It's the afternoon, so I don't have my coffee to drink. As my pausing mechanism, I have 2 water bottles. So I'll pause for some water in a second. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about data and policy analytics. This is a unit at the Office of Policy and Management. The unit's actually been around for a few years now, but we've grown in terms of size of staff and availability and breadth of tasks a lot in the last year. So the Chief Data Officer role was established almost a decade ago, and we really got our employee number one, Pauline Zaldonis, who manages our open data portal about 5 years ago. So we manage the open data portal, which is a platform where we can post data that's aggregated or de-identified around state business. Um, Statistics that you might receive data requests about, reports that you might be able to digitize and make available. Those are all available to be posted on the open data portal. And there's a number of technology tools that we have available that plug into those data sets that allow you to create data stories or visualize data. That's something that we work with agencies directly on special projects or just to help them get their data out into the open. We manage the state's longitudinal data system and data sharing table, P20WIN. That's the preschool through age 20 workforce information network. And that's a group of 10 or so agencies that have established legal agreements and arrangements to be able to share data and match data across agencies. Those data sharing and data matching arrangements happen by external or internal request. So this isn't like a warehouse where data lives. Actually, it's a arrangement that allows us more easily to connect data between different state functions. We have the place where we've made a lot of growth in the last year or so is by housing our state's mapping and geospatial assets. So we have a geographic information officer, our colleague Alfredo Herrera, and two GIS analysts. And our GIS area of the unit is really focused on managing all of the state's GIS data assets and data processes. For instance, they're working right now on creating a brand new aerial imagery data set of the state. Planes are flying overhead as we speak, taking pictures of the state to assemble in one big giant data set. They work with municipalities around parcel data. They work with other state agencies like DEEP, Department of Transportation, and our safety agencies around some of their data needs that relate to maps and GIS assets. So that's a place where we're really excited to build out some content in the future for training. And then finally, we provide analytical capacity and guidance to agencies. You have a question about a tool you need to use or a best practice or how to actually establish governance practices. That's really the role of our unit. And we're led by the Chief Data Officer, Scott Gall. He's our boss. So we are here today because the state received American Rescue Plan Act funding going back almost 2 years now, but the lion's share of the funding was really appropriated at the end of state fiscal year 22, so at the end of last legislative session. These funds come from the U.S. Treasury Department and different from some other federal funders we might be experiencing. Your Department of Housing receives funding from HUD, or State Department of Education receives funding from the Federal Department of Education. In this case, Treasury has sent these funds to states and municipalities across the country, and OPM happens to be the agency that's helping to work around compliance and reporting of all related to all of these funds. Treasury has built this act on the requirements and expectations of the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act that was passed in 2018, signed in 2019. So there's a much higher standard for use of information to make decisions and generation of evidence, evaluation, data related to the way the funds are being spent. And anyone who's been involved with these projects knows that that creates a higher reporting burden in some cases than other federal funds that your agency might receive. But I like to think it also presents a really great opportunity to build and improve the data culture of the state. Because like I said earlier, everything we have to do for the American Rescue Plan are really just great conventions of good policy making and are all applicable to regular state business. So we think that there's a real opportunity to help our colleagues in state service build their skills, to build awareness for and need for greater data leadership and research capacity across state government. So that all begins with choosing indicators and metrics related to your work, whether you're leading an American Rescue Plan funded project or whether you're here because there's another element of state business that for which you'd like some support. This is your first stop. So I'm going to hand it over to Augusta, and she's going to lead us through the next slide or two.
So let's talk about choosing indicators and metrics. Indicators, do you mind going to the next slide, Rachel? Indicators are ways to measure progress towards achieving a specific objective or results. For those of you on the call receiving ARPA funds, you'll hear Rachel, a lot of the budget folks talk about the mandatory indicators as well as the agency selected indicators. These are measures that we are tracking for each of the different projects. So the mandatory indicators are chosen by the Treasury. They are specific to certain expenditure categories, and we understand that sometimes those measures may not align with your project, and that's okay. That's why there are also the agency selected indicators, which are indicators and metrics selected by your agency to track the progress towards the goal set out for the particular program or project receiving the ARPA funds. We are working on like a 2-pager to help folks kind of figure out what indicators or metrics are best to track and how to decide on that. Kind of summarizing a lot of the information presented today or during these workshops that we will eventually send out to folks on the call. So just keep an eye out for that. But as of right now, we can go ahead and jump into how do agencies, where can we start to select some of these agency indicators and metrics?
Great. Thanks, Augusta. We're excited about that two-pager. It's sort of like a frequently asked questions. We forgot to mention it yesterday, so tell your colleagues if they came to our workshop yesterday, you'll receive something, a link to it in a follow-up email. So most people say, where do I start? And this has been one of the biggest questions we've been asked, especially for folks who are beginning new ARPA projects. And for those who are engaged in sort of regular state business, sometimes this is a question you might ask yourself too. Even for state business that's been going on for a long time, I have so much data. Where do I really start? Um, so if you were at some of our earlier workshops, specifically around building a data culture, we encourage folks to start where you are and to re-examine some of the things that help guide the work that you do. So that could be your agency's mission statement, or in this case, it could be the project goals or the project description that you provided in the allocation request that you sent to OPM. That mission is basically your statement of what the work actually is. But out of the mission, we encourage folks to actually reverse engineer some questions. Strict researchers would think of these as research questions, but the project goals say what you're going to do, but they don't really help you necessarily decide on what information you might need to show that that's actually happening. So, by way of example, we encourage folks to mine your project's goals. And if you were at an earlier workshop, you might have seen me say, you mine your agency's mission. A lot of times things are hiding in plain sight. So, what I've done here is I've grabbed some of the text that was in allocation forms for ARPA based projects. These are projects, I think I might have some folks from each of these agencies. One is from DECD, one is from CSCU, and then the last one I believe is from Department of Agriculture. I just realized that I'm using a lot of acronyms, so I'll assume no knowledge and define all of those things as well. My apologies. I know we're all in state service, but sometimes you don't know all of the other agencies' acronyms. So Youth Build is a Department of Economic and Community Development project. Health Horizons is a Connecticut State Colleges and Universities project. And the last project, it doesn't state specifically, but this is the Farmers Market Nutrition Program that's through the Department of Agriculture. Right, if you read these and it's hard to kind of read and listen at the same time. So don't worry too much about reading in depth. But right in front of us are the things we say we'll do and the populations we say we'll serve. So if you're ever sitting around the table and you're trying to figure out, what data should we collect for our project? How are we going to demonstrate that we actually met the impact or demonstrated the impact or met the goals that we set out in the beginning? I've highlighted in yellow a way that you can identify some of the audience or participants, clients, customers, whoever they might be, depending on your agency's orientation. So in this case, Youth Build is aimed at-risk youth ages 16 to 24. The phrase at risk is a contested phrase. It's a complex phrase, and I just want to name the fact that this is what was described in the allocation form, not my words specifically. So there's probably be some need to define what we mean by at risk, but we're not talking about all youth ages 16 to 24. We're talking about a subset. And in terms of the farmers market nutrition program, while that might be aimed at different folks who are experiencing food insecurity, in this case, we're looking at the SNAP population for whom there are data at Department of Social Services. So the highlighted in green shows a little bit about some of the action orientation of the project's goals. What do we say we're going to do? And in some cases, some of the ways that we've talked a little bit of what some of the goals or outcomes that we might see highlighted in green, those providing job training and educational opportunities is still really broad. We could provide, there's all kinds of ways job training and educational opportunities manifest themselves on the ground. So I want to kind of dig into the first one and think about how would you reverse engineer a question that could guide, how you choose your actual data. So in this case, I'll just read aloud. Youth Build is a community-based free apprenticeship program that provides job training and educational opportunities for at-risk youth ages 16 to 24 who've previously dropped out of high school. So what question do you think this project's work will answer? And I've offered here, I'm going to paste in in our chat window. I'd love for you to go to this place, Slido, and we have the chance to actually work together to brainstorm some ideas for what question this might answer. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just call up, make sure this works. Yesterday we had a couple of technical issues, which we worked through pretty well. So first, let's hope that this is going to work. And it's an active poll. I don't see anyone typing yet, but that doesn't mean anything. So if you're having any issues accessing the poll, it'd be great if you could share those in the chat. And we have about 23 people with us today, which is awesome. Thank you for taking the time. So I know there's folks listening. So let me just also add in the chat the description of Youth Build, because sometimes it's hard to remember things when you don't have them right in front of you. And if folks are experiencing technical difficulties, now would be a great time to let me know. You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. Be brave. This works best when folks add a question. Are folks able to access the poll?
I think we're confused as to what you want us to, what the question is. Are you supposed to be sharing your screen or?
It's a real, you just told me that I wasn't sharing my screen, so now I am. So we were just talking about this particular, we were just talking about this particular project. So what question might this project's work answer? And I can offer some extra context if that would be helpful. So,
And it only allows for 12 characters.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say too. It limits the
Huh.
entry.
How strange! I did not do that yesterday. Okay, of course. Well, you know what? We don't necessarily have to use this poll. We could use the chat feature just fine. The poll does allow, thank you. The poll does allow us to have some anonymity, but if you're okay with owning your question and we've got a good start, that would be helpful. So if you have a question, so Ragavi, thank you for that initial start. How many youth in the age group 16 to 24 dropped out of school? So there's probably an element of the youth build work where they start with, what is the problem really? Youth are dropping out of school and we want to provide them with job training. Oh, it's on the right. Thanks, Bo. It's on the wrong one. Okay, my apologies. That's for the next question. See, listen, it's good to just demonstrate that sometimes even people who are comfortable and confident using technology can flub those things. Slido is a new tool for me, but it does provide a really nice canvas and backdrop for folks to both have a QR code to access it if they're at their own personal computer or use it on their phone. So my apologies for the confusion. I'll go back and share. We can use the chat window rather than the poll. So let me go back and just share the screen that we were working off of. I think that thank you for your help, because I think sometimes people are nervous to tell the person saying the words it's not working, and I am fine if you tell me that. I'd rather us work together and actually have a productive moment. Samantha, thanks for that question. How many youth in ages 16 to 24 have completed the program? So if we revisit the description here, clearly this pre-apprenticeship program providing job training and educational opportunities is being developed for a reason. So some of these questions are really great, probably answered with some descriptive information that we'd need to collect. Any other thoughts or ideas? I have a suggestion on the next slide, which you may have already seen as I was switching back and forth. What types of credentials do youth build participants earn post-completion? What communities need outreach to engage this population? So these are all fantastic questions. Actually, I think a lot of these questions end up, I feel like if I was here to present, and so far I haven't had the DECD folks who are running this program come to the workshop, so I'm going to have to thank them afterwards. A lot of the questions that we're logging are actually things I would expect to see in the data report or the impact report of this program. How many students are meaningful employed after program participation? These are all fantastic questions. So think about this. If we wanted to answer any of these questions, we'd have to make sure that we'd have the data collected in order to be able to do that. So I'm just going to skip ahead for a second, just show you, when I was thinking about this particular project, if people were sitting around saying, what data should we collect about the project? What I encourage folks to do, like I said, is reverse engineer your research question, back it out of what you have. So in this case, I think the question guiding this research, we had some great suggestions in our workshop yesterday. How do job training and education opportunities for at-risk youth impact high school completion? Is this a good idea at all, right? And if we provide these kinds of opportunities, like I see in your questions, what impact does it have on the students? Are they engaged in meaningful employment? How many people earn the credentials? This is really important to start from a place where then you can say, well, what kinds of data are we going to need to answer this question? I want to pause for a second, make sure that that concept makes sense, because I basically explained something quickly and then I asked you to do a thing and then inserted a lot of technology that didn't work. So I can see how this we could actually go back and do another example, specifically with the Health Horizons program or the Farmers Market Nutrition program, just because I don't want to keep moving if it didn't make sense to people. Do folks have questions or examples or maybe struggles that you've had with your own work? I feel like if you stick with me long enough, you'll have heard all of my shtick, all of my pause shtick, but I live with two middle school daughters, so a quiet space doesn't scare me. I know you might have questions, and that's okay. You can also use private chatting, like you can send me a chat in Teams if you don't want to say something in the group chat, or you could just like keep it all to yourself, and we could do this over email after. Any of those things work. If I was just going to back up for a second, one of the things that that some of these projects, we're really, really concerned about the impact of these projects. For instance, Health Horizons is a project that is intended to actually impact the labor market or the workforce of mental health professionals and health professionals. So one question that could be asked is, what impact do scholarships or the availability of innovative programs have on the nursing and mental health workforce? We've decided as a state that we think that providing support and expanding faculty opportunities is one pathway, but it's not necessarily the only one. So this exercise is meant to help folks to look at what we say we're doing and figure out if there's some kind of question that we can ask aloud, because it's easier to match data with a question. Questions and data go together. So sometimes if you see a statement like the youth build statement at the top, it could be really easy to draw some conclusions on your own about what you think the outcome is and miss the mark on some data that you might need later. So this exercise is really helpful. You can look at your agency's mission or the project goals you put on your allocation form if you have an American Rescue Plan funded project. And if you're part of a unit or in a project where there aren't goals or a mission established, it's always good to have that to return to. I found that was very grounding at the Office of Early Childhood. We often came back to our agency's mission because it had that human services component. So it's easy to ground yourself in that. And then you can sort of say, well, how well are we doing? Are we meeting our mission? And then you can mine your mission to kind of generate some of those questions. Thanks for coming along with the Slido bit. I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about data collection. What comes next? Once you have that question, how do you figure out what data do you need? And for folks who came to some of our earlier workshops, we talked about how data come from somewhere. They're not necessarily objective. Data collection efforts and the things that we decide to collect are decided upon by human people, sometimes robots, mostly humans. And while we think of data as being collected in kind of a linear fashion, we collect it, we analyze it, we report on it. I like to get folks to think about data in a life cycle orientation. My father taught biology for over 50 years, so he always loves to hear me invoke some kind of extra, like scientific element here. So we're really focused on the data collection piece right now. That's not to say that we can't talk about analysis, or we're going to talk a little bit about reporting today because we're going to talk about storytelling. But every time we collect data and analyze it and report on it, we have an opportunity to improve the quality of the data we collect. If you've ever run a survey or filled out a form or been the person that receives all of the papers from, even a sort of a private life activity, and you're trying to make sense of information, you say to yourself, oh, I should have asked the question this way, or I should have separated these two fields where people could write things down, or oh, I forgot to include that. So you often don't realize some of the gaps or some of the messiness until after you've actually collected the data. So that's why having that question to start is always really helpful, because it can help you kind of figure out how would I get the answers to this question? And data comes in a lot of forms. I think that while this is a really basic breakdown of the information that we could collect, if we were thinking about Youth Build specifically, we could decide that we wanted to measure the impact of that program through focus groups and interviews, which is a purely qualitative source of data. Or we could decide that we want to actually collect lots of information on all of the participants, have them complete surveys, do all kinds of extra collection about their attitudes and their thoughts and their opinions. And then we'd have a lot of data that is in a quantitative form. Or maybe we want to do both. So there's no one perfect way to do this, nor one right way. But just know that you have both quantitative and qualitative options. Um, and people are often wondering which way is really best. Should I do a hard and fast survey? Should I have people write things on a form? Should I have people use an app? Should I make observations? How should I do this? And a lot of that depends on a number of factors. And the it depends answer is a really frustrating one for people to hear. But first, it depends on if you have questions. So if you're just collecting data for data's sake and you're not sure what you're going to do with it, I'd recommend pressing pause and looking at what you have and figuring out if it has any meaningful relationship to the goals of what you're trying to do. Questions and data go together. So when you have a question, it helps guide what kinds of information you might need to provide answers, a report, a story afterwards. Sometimes the data alone are never enough. So an analysis, actually, transforming the data, combining it with other data sources is what gets you the answers to those questions. which method you use really depends on, do you have it, like, will you have enough at the end of the time? So maybe you really want to collect a lot of quantitative data, but you have a very small number of participants. Be great for a descriptive analysis, but it might not be useful for a really heavy statistical analysis where you want to show causality or connections in a really statistically sound kind of way. Um, you may want to actually break your data up into groups, disaggregate it to make comparisons. But if you don't have a sufficient amount of information, maybe you're only making observations, and so then you have to do a lot to code that up, and you find you don't have enough in all the categories. That can be a challenge. And oftentimes people think that they're going to measure something over time, but they never collect the time zero. They never collect an initial benchmark, and then the project gets the rules get made, all of the administration happens, it's off to the races, and then they realize, oh my gosh, I don't know how much change happened between the start and now because we never collected the start to begin with. Carl, great comment. Carl's part of our team here at DAPA in our GIS unit, and he's commented that geospatial analysis, so analysis with data that has a geospatial component, often struggle to match available data with research questions. Do you want to say more about that, Carl?
Sure, thanks. Sorry to intrude, but
No, you're great.
People have a lot of data, like especially in the environmental realm, like land cover, and they want to know some specific question that may be in a stream, but they don't have any information about the stream.
Yeah.
So they have everything around it, but they don't have the actual a sampling of that exact area they're trying to answer. Or another thing is they may have data that's at the county scale, but they want to ask a question that's at the town scale. So you have a mismatching between the geographies. And this is like all the intro GIS classes basically deal with this problem: is how do you transform and reanalyze data to have the data match the question.
I think I think it's not just limited to geospatial analysis too. I think there's a lot of questions we have even about demographics. People want to know the differences between groups, but we only ask the data at kind of a really high level grouping, for instance. And race and ethnicity is a really great example. Sometimes we ask with such great specificity that we have very tiny numbers in every category. Sometimes we ask with not enough specificity, so then we can't really get down to the nitty gritty granular differences between groups. I think this is a really common problem, which is why it's so important to try and think about either what story you want to tell. That's another way of saying, what question do you have? Because, in research outside of government, if you have a research question and your data don't quite match, you can always adjust your question a little to kind of make those things go together. We don't have that liberty here. We need to both tell U.S. Treasury how things were going, but also for the benefit of our community members and citizens and taxpayers need to demonstrate what we're doing. And so, that's why having that question is so important. And to Carl's point, sometimes you might come up short initially and identify that gap, and that's where you help your research and analysis come into alignment. Like I said earlier, every time you collect data, it's an opportunity to every time you analyze your data, it's an opportunity to improve the data you collect.
Rachel, can I mention one more thing?
Absolutely.
And that to what you're saying is that gap, though, often becomes a critical path forward for what you do next. It's
absolutely
you learn that you have this problem, that data doesn't match your question or your issue, but that is also a gift to you, because then you can start aligning your data collection and your research or your policy to find and fill that gap.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Just discovered a gap like this morning in a conversation with Department of Housing colleagues, and I couldn't be more excited to try and tackle it. So thanks, Carl. One thing I want to flag is that sometimes the data that you might be missing or the data you want to gather might already exist. So in an earlier workshop, we encouraged folks to really connect with some data experts or skilled data users within your own agency. So before you say, let's make a survey or let's make a form, ask around and make sure that an existing data collection system or data collection effort doesn't already do some of what you might need to do. And we're going to talk a little bit in a sec about, is this new or is this an existing project? So let's talk a little bit about, if this was our question, how do job training and education opportunities for at-risk youth impact high school completion? Let's set aside the Slido bit. Let's just use the chat. What data do you think we need to answer this question? Just use the chat. Some of us already kind of typed in questions that really made a lot of sense. And you can come off mute if you want to say them out loud. That's cool too. This is the part where I get really excited to see people type in the chat while I take a drink of water. So what kinds of data would we need if we were the ones that had to report out on youth build? We're making a report to a legislative committee on the progress, or we're called in front of appropriations, and we need to talk a little bit about, how did this impact high school completion? What kinds of things would we need? And it might feel obvious, but type the obvious things into the chat. So how many participating youth maintain employment? Whoa, a bunch of things all happen at once. How many participating youth maintain employment for a certain period of time, 6 months or a year? High school completion rate prior to youth build. Thanks, Bo. Thanks, Christine. Number of people served, Ramona. How many individuals who participated graduated? Number of students who participated in the program who completed high school versus those who didn't participate. These are all fantastic data points. Other things, keep them coming. Already feels like a lot of data points. Turns out that this is actually a really successful program in the city of Hartford that, thanks to American Rescue Plan efforts, will be expanded to the city of Stamford. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also going to have to send a note to them after this. It's a really easy to understand concept. There's a number of American Rescue Plan funded projects, and not that they're not easy to understand, but it take a lot longer to explain. The location, are these rural places or urban places? How many students are meaningfully employed? Meaningfully employed is my phrase of the week, Adrian. I'm like, what do we mean by meaningfully? But yes, we'd have to define that and then figure out what kind of engagement and employment they have. These are all fantastic suggestions. So you can see that the question, types of job training programs, I think I know what CIP codes stand for, Jonathan, but you're just going to have to unmute and tell me.
Sorry, it's the classification for instructional programs.
Fantastic. I see, the thing is, I in my outside of work, I'm part of a faith-based leadership program, and so we use a lot of both Hebrew and Yiddish, and so we do a lot of defining and assuming no knowledge. So thank you for that. So you can see having a question helps ground you in making more questions and being more curious. And one thing to do, like I said, is just look in your own backyard first. Don't go out, figuring out, like, creating new forms and creating new systems. Make sure that you don't already have a pathway that exists. Ooh, like a cost per person. So there'd be like a return on investment, or if there was a budget ask, we could know how much more funding we need. Great, Ramona. So these are all great suggestions. When we think about what data we're going to need, you've already covered some of my own suggestions. There's both the project or program data. In this case, we need to know a little bit about the types of training, the number of slots, the rates of graduation. How do we connect 6 months, a year out so we can understand that impact? And we need to know a little bit about demographic data. And to Carl's question, this is when I actually did this on purpose. I put location. Location's actually really squirrely. Do we mean city? Do we mean school? If we say school, we'd have to do extra work if we didn't collect town as well. For Ramona's question around rural versus urban, in our regional schools, kids could live in a town that's different from another participant in the program. There's lots of externalities you'd want to just make sure you understand. So when we think about the data that we need, we want to make sure that we cover answers to some of our basic questions. Because like I said, we're laying the groundwork and laying the foundation for the story we're going to tell about the work that we've done. One other consideration here is whether you're starting out or whether you're tending to something brand new. And there's benefits and drawbacks to being in either position. Sometimes starting out feels really daunting, but in some cases, you have some flexibility and some liberties that you can take. Whereas if you're tending to something, it might be an existing data system. So if you're starting out, in both cases, you're going to still look at that mission, look at that project goals, look at what you say you're going to do, and then think a little bit about how you're going to do that. And the central piece here is there already a data collection system that you could use or tag on to? But if you're tending, you have to think a little bit about how this work is new or different from the existing work and if there's a way to modify. So by way of example, there's a few projects that exist out there that are scaling existing work. There's some behavioral health interventions that expand our mobile crisis unit service to third shift. So that means we can serve people around the clock. Well, based on the time code when someone's case might be entered, that might be how we designate that they're being served by these American Rescue Plan funds, because we wouldn't otherwise be able to serve them at 2 o'clock in the morning under or without these American Rescue Plan funds. Sometimes people are scaling something to a new city, like the Youth Build program. It's already in Hartford, operated by a particular nonprofit provider. Now it's going to be scaled to a new place, and that nonprofit provider might use their own system, or maybe they'll use the existing nonprofit provider system, but the city now isn't going to be Hartford, it's going to be another place. So there's ways to think about using existing data systems to actually make sure you capture the specific work that's underway. But it's important to kind of figure out, are you doing the work as the agency? Are you using a partner in the community to do the work and do the data collection? So it's really important to just spend some time with those kinds of considerations, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that everyone's able to collect the data that you'll need to answer those questions. And, getting started, I think, on this, both the generating data collection question, generating questions and indicators, and making that data collection strategy, that actually is one of the hardest pieces. It's almost like a strategic planning effort where you sit down, you're building your data culture, and in many cases, we're out of practice. We've been asked to run a marathon without sneakers. So, first, if you were going to run a marathon, you'd get sneakers. You'd make a training plan. You'd start building your distance little by little over time. And for many of these projects, we've been asked to do something right away. So I recommend taking a little extra time out of an existing meeting to start just doing some of this mission and project goal discussions, thinking about some of the questions that you have. And remember, we're here as partners in evaluation and impact to support your work. Um, think about that larger story you're trying to tell and look at those data collection resources that you have available to you. And we're going to talk in a sec about considering your audience for the data storytelling. Always in the back of your mind, if you're unsure about what data you have or how you're going to use it, think about how you want to talk about the work ultimately. And that will help ground you in the kinds of information and the kinds of claims you want to make. Then you need to find all of the things to support those claims. We're gonna shift gears and talk about some data storytelling. So before I do that, are there thoughts, questions, feedback, ideas about some of the things we just talked about in terms of matching your question with data collection resources? We can get into much greater specificity with your specific work to offline, if that's something that would be useful or of interest. Okay. I don't see further questions, so I'm just gonna forge ahead. This is actually some of my favorite content. Data story, most of the time people come to our workshops, and I used to teach some of these workshops with the Connecticut Data Collaborative as well. So most of the time when people come to workshops, they want us to show them how to use their data in a data story. And so it's really important to start with data storytelling is very difficult with bad data, and no data are really bad per se. Sometimes they're mismatched, sometimes they're wrong. As Carl said, sometimes there are gaps. So data storytelling is actually really difficult if you don't do all of this very frustrating, sometimes painstaking work of thinking about what your question is, what data do you need to answer that question so that you can actually tell a really great story. And I'm not going to go through all of the conventions of data storytelling today. That's a different workshop that I'm happy to lead. Actually, before our annual reporting, it's probably a really good conversation. If folks are interested, please let us know in the evaluation. But data storytelling is all about having a message and matching that message with a really great visual. But it's not that alone. I want to pause for a moment. Adrian, was that an accidental hand raise or did you have a question?
I wanted to have a thumbs up that the data storytelling workshop would be
Thank
awesome.
you. No worries. I will
Thank
do
you.
that. No
Sorry.
problem. No, it's great. We're actually as a unit working on some content right now for a full day training for a different audience. And so I think this is definitely going to be a component. People like data stories. They like them because they're inspiring, they're visual, oftentimes they're arresting, they help you escape where you are and think about things in a different way. They might even change your mind. But oftentimes people treat data and statistics like they're a standalone story. So I could tell you that I just heard a statistic, yes, this morning. 47% of people whose net worth is over $25 million worry they don't have enough money. Don't ask me for the sourcing of this, first of all. I heard it on a podcast. And I think that person heard it somewhere else. I just told you, people think that's a data story. I told you something, it's a statistic. Stories have structure, and people love stories because stories take you through a whole kind of journey with characters in a place. They help bring you somewhere, they teach you something. And data stories have the same potential. So, real stories have structure to them. There's a place where the stories happen, there are people in the stories, there's often a conflict in those stories, and there's a resolution. And all of these things, there's really only a few story archetypes out there, but all story archetypes have all of these components to them. And data stories should have some of this structure. So they should have a setting. Methods are a way of actually making a choice, a subjective choice about, what you are or are not going to collect, where you're going to collect your data. Your sample and your analysis are the way that you actually make a subset of that data and you identify who the people are and what the plot's going to be of that story. The findings are really that conflict, that pivotal moment where you tell people the actual message. And then the resolution is really moving people to action. What are they supposed to do with those findings? So really good data stories have this kind of structure too. They don't just drop a statistic on you or drop one infographic on you. They help you through interpreting a chart, interpreting information, even in a basic table, and moving you to action. Um, so in terms of actually starting to think about data storytelling, these questions and these data have to go together. If they don't go together, you'll reach this point of creating findings or having people, be moved to have some kind of recommendation or implications or policy making recommendations, and folks won't know what to do. They don't know what question you were trying to answer originally, or maybe the data doesn't quite answer the question. So if you're intending to tell a data story, chances are you're going to have to check the boxes on a number of these components in order to tell something really effective. So I want to end here with questions and data go together, because all throughout today's conversation and in our previous workshops, what we've been trying to encourage our colleagues to think about is, where do you want to go? What story do you want to tell about the work? How will you demonstrate that the work matters? And I say this with as much reverence as I have for the work we're all doing, because these are unprecedented funds we've received as a state. Many of us are engaged in brand new work that might not be funded by the American Rescue Plan, but it has great implications for public health or civic life. And my job in partnership with Augusta is to help you tell the story of that work, to garner support for it, to garner greater budget and scalability of those projects. Those questions and that data are crucial to those next steps. So where do we go from here? I know that folks, especially those associated with the American Rescue Plan, are in quarterly reporting right now. So I know things were due last week, and we're working through some questions with our budget colleagues here at OPM. Next up comes our annual report. So our annual report is coming up. We're going to be working on it through when it's due at the end of July. So we're going to be reaching out to ask some questions about the things that you maybe said you were collecting and hear a little bit about how data collection is going. But we really want to know what you need as our colleagues, because this only works, data capacity building only works when we hear what your needs are. And we know that they range from sort of the novice basic skill building to the more technical. So I've been showing this list every time we're together, but we do have real concrete plans right now building out content to demonstrate over the summer and into the fall. So we're really excited about some of the things that we'll be offering. But if you see something here that you definitely need help on now, don't hesitate to reach out. And like I said, we are your partners in this work, and we just want to support the work that you're doing. And we're really grateful for your engagement today and for your engagement in all the workshops we've been doing. Like I said, it's a organic effort, and so that means that it requires people sharing information about the work that we're doing. It requires people going, sort of a door-to-door retail, really promoting the work if the content is useful. And we're here to really modify it and make it useful for you. So I really want to thank you for your engagement today. Thanks for working with us through some of the technology challenges that we had using the chat and sort of attributing your own comments, not anonymously. And we do have a very brief evaluation request. I'm putting the link in the chat here. It takes under a minute to respond, but we really would very much appreciate feedback. Even if you filled this out before for a different workshop, we'd appreciate you filling it out for this workshop so we can learn a little bit more about some of the suggestions that attendees of this workshop have for future training opportunities. And I'm really grateful for your time. So I remain open for questions, feedback, ideas, and if you feel like you're all set, please do offer us some feedback on the evaluation form, and we hope to see you in a future workshop.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, you can use the hand raising feature. You could choose to depart, all of those things. I'll just keep talking and the recording will end when we end our session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your engagement. Once we get down to under 10, I usually end it about there. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.